Start the recording. So today we're going to be talking with Professor and Dr. David Brannan. Very happy to have him as one of our new faculty members here at Idaho State University in our Homeland Security and Emergency Management degree program. Before we do get started, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping, and then we can make sure that we get everybody up to date. Just want to make sure that everyone is able to see and hear us. And so I'm assuming that that is going to be good to go. I'm going to go back to my screen here, and I should introduce myself. I'm Lori Holine. I am a professor here at Idaho State University, and I am the program director that oversees Homeland Security and Emergency Management. So I will be serving as the moderator for today's event. This is a series of webinars that we have put together. We've been doing this for about a year, and we want to bring leaders and influencers within the sectors of emergency management and homeland security to help us better understand some of the changing dynamics that we have in the discipline. And so we really look forward to hearing those folks share their insights with us. So tonight, it's a real treat that we have David Brannan, who's speaking with us, talking about dangerous discourse. And we have some additional webinars that are coming up. I just want to put this on your radar. So coming up next week, we will be meeting with Judd Freed, who will be kind of talking about national leadership from the local level. It will be kind of an interesting, great, informative discussion with him. Coming up at the beginning of November, we will be hosting former Secretary of DHS, Janet Napolitano, will be our guest. And then later in the month of November, we will have Paul Ryan from domestic nuclear background, who will talk with us about that particular threat environment. We also, for potentially, if somebody is interested in our degree programs, we will be hosting a degree program webinar. So if somebody is interested in that, please shoot me an email. I'll be happy to share that with you. So these are just a couple of, keep on your radar for these events that are coming up over the next few weeks. And as we do kind of move forward into this Q&A session, will be enabled. So there's a Q&A button. So instead of using a chat feature, we would really encourage you to use the Q&A button. That's where I will be checking to see if there's some questions. I did want to say thank you to those people who have identified some questions that they would like to hear Dr. Brannan address. So we have plans to make sure that we can work those in. And, everybody is going to be muted. So that's just kind of the efficiency way that we'll operate this. But that is primarily the things I wanted to touch base on before I turn it over to Dr. Brannan. These are some resources, and I will pop this up at the end of our webinar. These are potentially, great resources for you to read up on about some of the things that he will be discussing. So at that point, I am just going to kind of get us started as we move forward. So very happy today to be able to introduce to you David Brannan. I'm going to start by giving you some of his background. Very impressive, but he is our featured speaker today. Very honored to have him. He, as I mentioned, just recently joined our faculty here at Idaho State University. And, he's really an innovator, and he's a world authority in the field of Homeland Security, terrorism analysis, the use of social identity theory in how to use that to counter extremism and terrorism. He holds a Doctor of Philosophy in Theology from the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, where he focused on the study of theologically motivated terrorism. Dr. Brannan regularly publishes in both academic and practitioner-focused research related to Homeland Security, counterterrorism, extremism, and he has received multiple awards and recognitions for his research. Dr. Brannan is both a scholar and a practitioner, combining a deep academic knowledge with real-world experience and practicality. He has an extensive background in domestic and international extremism, terrorism, and violent subnational group conflict. In addition to serving in domestic law enforcement, Dr. Brannan was the Director of Security Policy and the MOI Chief of Staff for the Department of Defense, Coalition and Provisional Authority in Iraq, which is where he was wounded by an insurgent mortar fire while he was serving. I'm sure he's got a lot of stories to tell, for sure. Dr. Brannan has spent 20 years as a senior faculty with the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, lecturing on international and domestic terrorism, extremism, discourse analysis, and ethics. Dr. Brannan spent 5 years as a policy analyst with the think tank of RAND, researching and writing on terrorism and law enforcement issues. He's the Vice President of Strategy at the Hoffman Group, a counterterrorism-focused research and education organization. So thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Brannan.
Lori, you are too nice. Thank you very much. It is amazing what you can find on the internet. I bought that from a deal on Google. So that isn't really me. I'm just kidding. Lori is the keeper of all details at ISU Homeland Security. The lady is amazing at keeping all these cats going in the right direction. I'm going to yak for about 20, 30 minutes. And then I would like to have a discussion is what I would like to do. But I'm going to share some slides with you. And anybody who knows me well knows that I really am not the greatest technologist in the world, but it looks like it's up there anywhere. So if you want to fully participate, I would ask you to, if you're on a computer, to do what it says for a computer. You can respond at pollev.com/David Brannan 736. It's scary to think that there are 735 other David Brannans, but evidently there are. And if you're using a phone, look at the one below, and you just text that to 37607, because I want to ask you some questions about identity. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm a social identity theorist, and I believe that tells us a lot about the potential for conflict in the security environment we're in now. These pictures, they represent some striking discursive frames. The one on the left is the discursive frame between the urban and rural environment. And folks, that is becoming more and more real every day. That is becoming a thing that is dividing us. And it's a shame that it is. And then, of course, everybody's familiar with what happened at the Capitol. But maybe this is perhaps a fantastic picture of social discourse, discursive frames across these social groups with political elites. Here, President Trump talked about General Milley deserving execution. And at the same time, that was a month ago. And then this month, former Secretary Clinton said maybe there needs to be formal deprogramming of the cult. And she was referring to MAGA members. That ought to scare us. We're talking about executing service members, and we're talking about deprogramming people who have expressed a political priority or a political favor. That's not where we need to be. I'm going to suggest if you and I'll just skip to the end and tell you, I'm going to advise you to kill your TV and read more books. This would be a great one to start with. Jonathan Haidt tells us what it's like to be at the barbecue with people that we know and love, people that have invested themselves in your life, and then suddenly ideas that are formulated around religion often or politics divide very good people, and they bring them to a point of strongly disliking, and I dare say sometimes hating, the people that they're very close to. So let me ask you to do this one thing. Go to this poll everywhere, and this is a reminder to me to switch to this other activity. Look at that, it works. Technology in my life. And I'd ask you to just answer these questions. It's I am a, and you tell me what you are. You are this race, you are that religion, you are this whatever. I'm going to give it just a few minutes. We have a few people on the line, and these are really important buckets that identify who we are. But as you're looking at these, and some people are going, well, wait a second, is that what I am, or am I something else? You do have to kind of figure out what role plays the principal position in your life. So a specific nationality, 50% of the folks say that's, well, it was 50%. Come on now it's 44. But race is 11%. Religion is, I'm not going to be able to keep up with you people. You're too fast. But these four buckets seem to be important in our lives. Let me ask you another question. If I can see my little button there. There we go. What is nationalism? Can you just type it in? And nobody cares about your spelling, so don't get too worried about it. Just one word that identifies what you think of when you think of nationalism. These are very good. Sorry if I'm being quiet, but there's a lot popping up here, and it's quite interesting. Porter's pops up there on the left-hand side, and that's interesting to think about that in relation to nationalism. And rough, I would like to know more about that. Pride, yeah, that's great. And loyalty and identity and nation, these are that's excellent. I'm going to leave it there and take you over here. So what's one word that describes American identity to you? You know, I lived in a few different countries, and somebody put outspoken. And I will tell you that sometimes if you're living in a foreign country, American identity is identified as you're speaking too much. Quit being too willing to talk. I was never able to get that under control. shockingly. I love that somebody put down democracy here, freedom and democracy and pluralism. All of these really go together in my mind, certainly patriotism. All right, I'm going to switch back here. See, I give myself little signs because I don't want to get lost there. Because I can do it. So thank you for playing along with me there. So this good-looking man is Henri Tajfel, who was a French Jewish man who was a soldier during World War II, whose family was wiped out in the Holocaust, and he was not. And he was taken prisoner, and he could not figure out why he was left alive. And he spent his whole life trying to figure out how his identity as a French soldier saved him from the identity of being a French Jew, like all of his family being killed. And he started doing these experiments, and he called them the minimal group paradigm experiments. And he did them over and over again, and they've become really well known because he would take people based on their eye color and separate them, or based on their music preference. Do you like classical music or do you like jazz? Or just some random separation, and then allow that group to be together for a short time. And there would be bias within that group against those in the out group. This has had a significant impact on social psychology. And my last point on this slide is that religion and politics are much more than eye color to us. At least they are to me. They become thoroughly infused in who we are as a people and the groups that we end up identifying with. And at least part of self-perception is formed by group membership. And there's a cognitive component to that, and an evaluative component to that, and an emotional component to that. And that is, I know I'm a member of this group, and I evaluate myself in relation to other groups. So if you're a Rotarian, or if you're a Lion, or you're a Kiwanis, I'm making these up, I'm not any of these, you evaluate yourself in your relationship to your service club in relation to these others, and it makes these other groups, and it makes you either feel good or it makes you feel bad. And this happens a lot with important groups. For instance, some of you will belong to Costco, let's say, a buying club. Well, that's not a very strong draw as a group identity. You may have a card that tells you paid your however much money it is. The boss lady at our place is the one who pays for that. I don't actually know how much that costs. But you may have a card that says you're a member of that, but you may well be willing to go to Walmart or wherever if the price is cheaper. The group identity is not that strong. A colleague and I, named Anders Strindberg, he works for FOI in Sweden, and I worked with him for years at the Naval Postgraduate School. We've been working on an analytical method that allows Homeland Security professionals to look at these relationships and constrain the range of possibilities that might happen from a given group. We've applied this to criminal groups, to terrorist groups. We've applied it to extremism, and we've been fairly successful with it. And I put this social identity analytical method facilitating social science-based practitioner analysis. This is quite a mouthful for a title. I put this down here because we just published this, and it's the first publication I've had while I'm at Idaho State, and I'm pretty happy about it. I have resources for you at the end of this. If you get interested in this as a way of working through challenges that you have in bureaucratic situations, the analytical framework works the same if you work in DHS or DOD, or if you're concerned with extremism or terrorism. Now, I want to point out that this ascribed and assumed identity can be problematic for us. A lot of times we ascribe an identity to the outgroup. For instance, these are all pretty much the same, just religious terrorists, right? And you're all going to assume that they're either Central Asian or Middle Eastern and Muslim. But that's an ascribed rather than assumed identity. And that can be a problem for us. For instance, the men in the green bandanas are Hamas. Maybe you've heard of them recently. But the people on the far right, that's the Islamic State. Hamas killed all the Islamic State Takfiri Salafi jihadists that came into the Gaza Strip. So there is a group identity that is not compatible there. And that can be based on religion. It can be based on political perspectives. It can be based on power politics. But the groups see themselves very differently. And then I just want to point out that this gentleman in the middle with the red and white headband on works for the United States government, or worked for the United States government in northern Iraq and Syria fighting the Islamic State. And so we can ascribe an identity to him based on outgroup narratives that are not accurate, and that can hurt us in the policy making, and it makes us less effective as Homeland Security leaders. So recognizing the keys to these distinctions on identity are super important, and they become important to you if you want to be accurate in knowing what's going on in the news. For instance, like right now in Israel with Hamas and how that relates to anybody else. But it also matters in relationship to people that you're working with just in your own department or agency. So I'm going to ask you to do something else here. Let's go back on. And I apologize for switching back and forth, but well, I don't actually apologize that much. It's just jumping around a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on this. Well, what did I do? Went too far the wrong direction. I apologize. There we go. I must have hit the right. So tell me, who's the greatest threat to the United States? And I would beg you not to say the U.S. Congress. That would be rude. Or Russia got left out. I think they appreciate that very much, getting left out of this one. In fact, I think they're trying to hide undercover. Right. So I would agree with you people that domestic extremism and China and foreign terrorists, and I would say also Russia, are all significant and serious threats to U.S. democracy. So that I'm with you. Let's look at this. Can you tell me what the cause of civil war is? Failed governments, autocracy, poverty. Yeah. And I know that it's unfair because there are no single cell solutions to any of these challenges that we're looking at tonight. They are all made up with a very complex and oftentimes chaotic intertangling of many different strands. But I wasn't able to mind map that on there. Okay, thank you. So the US is a stable democracy and essential to global security. And oh, jeepers. Who let those people that don't like us in there? What we're doing here. So there's a few that don't buy that we are either stable democracy or essential to global security. And it's not fair to put both of those because they could be different. But 80% of you or thereabouts believe that's about right. And so then factionalism in the US is a major security challenge. And that might be true. I've heard it argued that factionalism isn't real. What that is the media dragging us around, telling us what to believe. I've heard other people that I trust and respect say that this is a concern, and it's a concern directly related to our security environment. Fortunately, we're in America and we don't have to listen to what anybody says. We can have our own mind and make up our own decision on what we want to do. So I appreciate you going along with me here. And, you know, I'm pretty pro-American, folks. I grew up in a military household. I went to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan. I didn't get the T-shirt. I missed my barbecue. But I believe in American democracy, and I actually believe American democracy is important. And I always root for America when it comes to the Olympics. So I naturally assumed that we are the world's strongest democracy, and some commie decided to tell me I was wrong. Now it turns out there are three, and I will give you the organizations who keep track on this stuff. Three that are really well trusted by researchers in the area, and they don't list the United States of America in the top 10 strongest democracies, which basically I just went, well, that's just wrong. Clearly you're a commie. And that's not going to work for me. But then I dug into the research a little bit, and the Democracy Index has been around a while and is really well respected. Economist Intelligence Unit has been doing it, and it lists us way down, third rung down. And I thought, yeah, but you're heavily influenced by Europe, so I don't want to trust you either. It turns out that the highest we get is actually by these Europeans. They rate us at number 25 on the democracy ratings. Democracy Matrix puts us at 36. But the Freedom House, which is an outstanding organization, I'm going to give you links to that as well for your own research. it says this: even as Americans remain committed to the ideals of democracy, which made me feel good, a majority see democracy in the United States as weak and getting weaker, according to a national survey. That made me very sad and not very happy. In fact, I dug into the Freedom House ratings because of that. And I found Sweden. If any of you know, I have a close friend and colleague of 27 years because I can't lose him, named Anders Strindberg. And he's from Sweden. And this just burst my bubble in relation to him because it made it very difficult for me to continue giving him a hard time when they came out with a rating of 100. And we came out tied with Romania, the place, but we did beat out Ghana, and I did feel good about that. I'm concerned about this because these are different elements that contribute to how we see ourselves, but also how others see us with a less biased lens, perhaps. So why am I asking about, so why am I asking about all this democracy? Is because it matters. We recognize this chap with the bad haircut from North Korea at the bottom, and we recognize all the democratic states on the top. But anocracy is an interesting word that some of you may not even be familiar with. I know until I really started reading this, I hadn't read it very much. But a terrorism studies researcher back in the 70s named Ted Gurr and his group, they came up with this. And anocracy is a regime that mixes democratic and autocratic features together. And so that can be an autocratic regime that's headed towards democracy and going through that and mixing them together, or it can be a democratic regime that is losing its democratic edge. And in 2020, on the not poultry, there's no chickens involved here. We were designated as an anocracy. That breaks my heart. It allowed Switzerland to take our place as the longest continuous serving democratic country in the world.
So, Dr. Brannan?
Yes, ma'am.
There's been a couple of questions specifically about the way that we're framing and talking about democracy. And I wondered if maybe we could interject some of those questions and comments before you move too far down the line. So we have somebody who's asking, what is the criteria for strong democracy? And then
it is slightly different in the three different groups that evaluate strong democracy. But rule of law, peaceful transition of power, these are the kind of the hallmarks that all of them use. And so they're rating us against other countries in these same categories.
And then we have a comment from Judd Freed, and he's asking, in part, isn't democracy, democracy argument influenced by the concept of pure democracy, something other nations assume is good, while the US is not and has never been a pure democracy? We are, of course, a representative republic based on democratic principles.
You know, I think that Judd Freed must work for Kim Jong-un because he's looking at my slides and he's exactly right. We are a representative republic. And I don't assume that pure democracy is the better. And our republic is absolutely in the running. They are not excluded for the Republican form of governance. So yes, I would absolutely agree with Judd. We're in violent agreement, Judd. Let me just say this, though. Some really smart folks who came up with this country suggested that factions were a big deal. They were so incredibly concerned about it that they said in Federalist number 10 that it isn't an outside force that can destroy us. It is an inside force that will destroy us if we're destroyed. Factions were the thing they were concerned about destroying this country. And in fact, to Judd's point, which is a great point, that is the reason they wanted to form this as a republic. So why do I bring all that up? So there've been, at the agency, there have been scholars working on this subject for a long time, and they have found, certainly since the 70s, but since 1989, you can find the information online. So they found three things that are very important towards countries that are going to go into it, one of three different kinds of insurgency and possibly civil war. And that is whether or not they are an anocracy, that there is extreme factionalism, or that, and with the existence of armed militias. Now, our universities in Idaho, and we have these, let's see, we have the John Brown Gun Club present. We have the Boogaloo Boys present. We have the Proud Boys present. The NFAC is the Not Effing Around Coalition. I'm not sure that we have those or the Redneck Revolt. Now, the John Brown Gun Club, the NFAC, and the Redneck Revolt are all left-wing militias. Obviously, Boogaloo is commonly associated with the right. I would argue that there is an internal argument going on within the Boog right now over the soul of Boogaloo. They are essentially accelerationists, and if they can get the war started from the right or the left, they'll take either one. I would note that the Not Effing Around Coalition is the largest militia in this country. When's the last time you heard about that? You probably didn't. That should be of some concern to us, right? I bring all this up to say, so what? Friend of mine, Chris Bellavita, it always used to tell me, so what? Get to the so what, would you? Well, the so what is this, people. The 3 times more likely for a country to slip into civil war if these 3 elements are present. And I don't like that idea. The agency says there's 3 different kinds of insurgency: pre-insurgency, a common grievance, and collective identity. I don't think many of us would have a hard time figuring that out. Incipient conflict is marked by discrete acts of violence. And in the present day, I would mark this back to April 19th, 1995, which is Oak City bombing, which is really marks a demarcation in these types of violence. And then a sustained violence involving terrorism and guerrilla warfare. Now, we certainly have terrorism. We do not yet have guerrilla warfare. I want to note that a civil war, as identified by CIA, has to have 1,000 casualties a year. And we are not there yet, folks. So are we doomed? I'm going to say we may be a bit doomed. Social media is definitely ripping apart the fabric of society. And we're doing this over likes. Singer's book on like warfare, or any of the more modern stuff on how the battleground is prepared through social media will make it very clear to you very quickly how dangerous social media has become to this very open society. I am all for maintaining an open society, but the social media becomes an amplifier that is not challenged. And that's because it happens in these silos where nothing else is really heard. I do want to say that I think there is a serious debate to be had about censorship. But I also want to say that just because there is a serious debate to be had about censorship, for instance, I'm quite concerned that Twitter banned President Trump. Okay, that is a significant problem, but there needs to be public discourse on that issue. And we need to deal with it, not just act like it has to be one of the two poles. These algorithms are keeping people on the platform now for money. When this started, this was about this social media was being sold to us as this is going to democratize the world. This is not democratizing the world. This is making money for a few folks. I'm all for making money. Don't get me wrong. I am not all for destroying our situation here in the United States. So what do? There's a couple of these very obvious things that keep us from being an anocracy. Two of these I want to talk a bit more about. One of them is this. Think about the people that drive you nuts at work. Think about the people that drive you nuts in your family. Essentially, when you boil it all down, we are Americans with disagreements. And I beg you to see the skeleton and not the irritation. Because social identity theory says that you've got to decategorize people and recategorize and cross-categorize people to stop the violence. And oftentimes that comes through external circumstances. And some of you will remember some of the times that it happened. In World War II, the state of Jefferson was on the California's ballot. They wanted to break away just north of, from Colusa County to the Oregon border. The state of Jefferson wanted to break away from California because they said, you people are crazy. You're not the same as us. And we are rural and want to enjoy our rural identity. But on December 7th, 1941, this external stimulus reunified, it and cross-categorized people to stop worrying about the state and to start worrying about fighting an external enemy. Certainly that happened on 9/11. I would argue that it did not happen for as long as I thought it would. It broke down much more quickly than it broke down in World War II. And then in the bottom right, you'll probably recognize this as one of the pictures of the Hamas rocket attacks from 4 days ago coming out of Gaza. You know, the state of Israel has been in turmoil. The prime minister has had significant pushback over changes that he wanted to make to the judiciary. When this attack happened, it reunified everyone. What I'm arguing is, yes, this can come from an external source. We don't need to wait and let that happen from an external source. What we can do, first of all, is recognize we're having this conversation here this evening. And that means it isn't too late. We haven't gone too far down the path. I will say that this book, How Civil Wars Start, I think you ought to read it. I think she goes too far and argues that it all is lost. My hair's on fire. I want to argue, as Judd did, that consider that a republic demands compromise and governmental balance. It demands compromise. You cannot have everything you want. We also need to de-re and cross-categorize religious and political opposites. And that is difficult. And that's why I argued you should read this book. Okay. Urge people you're mentoring, urge people that you work with to invest in rather than tearing down U.S. institutions. This is incredibly important. The structures that we have are what make us free and safe. We should not attack them. I believe in deep and thoroughgoing civic engagement and critical thinking. And for me, critical thinking means shutting my mouth, opening my computer because my handwriting stinks, and typing my way through, working my way through difficult problems to think critically about those. I beg you to kill your TV. Just get rid of it, because there's nothing on Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, or any of these other infotainment channels that have any value. There is serious analysis out there. The stuff coming from Dan Byman and Bruce Hoffman and the likes is so much more valuable to you in working your way through what to do for our country. And I urge you to save the idea of my enemy for real enemies like China, like Russia, like Iran, because these are real enemies, and invest in civic nationalism. I'm going to make sure that you have some of these resources. And the question about how to evaluate a democracy can be found in 3 of these web links, which will do a much better job of explaining it than I will. Folks, it really is all about the barbecue. And I'm not joking here. Barbecues are important to me because I believe in meat. But they're important because that's the place where you have serious discussions with people you love or that you want to influence. And I urge you to get beyond this destructive discursive framework and get to civic engagement, civic nationalism. That is the root of patriotism. And I apologize if I got kind of preachy there. I get a little worked up about my country. I'm a big fan of the United States, so I'll shut up and let somebody else yak for a bit.
Well, I thank you so much for sharing those insights. And I think it's, we're all trying to, grapple with ways to apply your words of wisdom to what we see going on around us right now. We did receive some questions in advance, so I want to make sure I give an opportunity to give some time for you to address some of those. And certainly through our conversations, Dave, I know you're tracking a lot of what's going on with Israel's war with Hamas, and wanted to kind of understand from your perspective, what is really important for Homeland Security professionals to know about these developments? What's the takeaway? If you could give us some insights about that.
Yeah, okay, so there isn't a single takeaway. One of my colleagues, Angie English, talks about complexity a lot, and she's exactly right, and that needs to be applied here. This is an incredibly complex issue, and there will be no single answers. I had 1,000 people contacting me today about what is this thing and how do we kill these people and this kind of stuff. this is going to sound bad. Some people need to die. That is certainly the truth. But if you kill the wrong people, you extend this conflict forever. So usually you can get away with stuff for about 2 weeks. That time frame is narrowing, and the numbers of civilians killed will be held against you. And so that becomes a real issue. Obviously, all the innocents that are killed, this is terrorism. But Bruce Hoffman said in a piece yesterday or today, I don't know, I've read so many cotton picking pieces, I can't keep them straight right now. But he said at one point, yes, this is dang sure terrorism, and terrorism isn't about the violence, and we tend to forget that. The violence is a method of communicating their political goal. But some of this violence is so incredible that it is war crimes. It's crimes against humanity. The faces of those people who were taken back into Gaza and are being held and will, yes, and are being held there. That terror, that fear, that's nothing that can be excused. At the same time, I want to remember that Menachem Begin, the former prime minister of Israel, led the Irgun. And the Irgun was dang sure a terrorist organization that attacked the Brits. The Brits hung some of his compatriots, and back when the Brits were still doing that sort of thing. And they had wanted posters out for him. So the terrorism, this is such savagery, okay? It's such savagery. And please do not conflate my desire to understand what is going on with any way of justifying it or paving that over, papering it over. That I've been in counterterrorism a long time. These people I want brought to justice. But you do have to recognize that they've been at this since 1948, trying to get people to say, we need a Palestinian homeland. That being said, it's never okay to kill people to do that. And yet it's almost always requires killing people for a new state to emerge. Ask the ANC, ask the African National Congress. You know, when Nelson Mandela died, this country lost its mind. But this was dang sure a man who ordered the killing of innocents. So the terrorism is about communicating that political violence. I'm saying that as an analyst, not as someone who justifies that, because I feel deeply. I mean, you've heard me talk about Bruce Hoffman here. He's one of my dearest friends on earth, a Jewish man who spent much of his life in Israel. Another colleague, Nadav Murad, Israeli. I mean, these are not others to me. These are part of my in-group. But the call as an analyst isn't to justify action. The call as an analyst is to give the policymaker a range of alternatives that might make us more effective. Sorry, did I lose my mind? Hamas is seriously upset. Sorry.
Yeah, you're covering a lot of things that I think are coming up, which I think we can all appreciate. Some of the folks who've expressed some additional questions are wondering, what do you think? How is this conflict that's happening in Israel? How will that affect discourse in the United States as we're approaching a coming election? And turning it back to looking within the borders of the U.S. And there's a lot of questions that people are asking for your feedback, having to do with the political tensions that we're seeing that are spilling over into society. So could you kind of address some of those thoughts?
Absolutely. That's a great question, because, you know, in 2000 and something, 3 or 4 or something, I wrote a piece on the end of domestic terrorism, because really domestic things are not just domestic anymore. the speed of this communication and the way it can impact allows the international to impact the domestic in a way that 30 years ago you couldn't have imagined. And I absolutely believe that this is going to harden lines between in-groups and out-groups. It's going to be used to justify, I told you you needed to do X and you didn't do X at the political elite level. And it's going to drive us, I fear, into our in-group rather than into a coalition to stop how this might impact us from within as factions. I will tell you that I don't think there is a top-down way of fixing this. I think it has to be organic and come from the bottom. And that's not a popular thing because we want a bureaucratic answer and we want it on Tuesday, dang it. We want it to just happen. But I don't believe that's possible here.
Yeah, somebody else asked the question, can you help us possibly identify some steps that could be taken to decrease these political divides that we are seeing right now? And we just heard you say, hey, it really is going to need to come from the ground up. An organic shift may need to take place. But do you see anything that could help nudge it in a direction?
Yeah, these kinds of conversations, I know they feel like we're just wringing our hands. These kinds of conversations between concerned people with different viewpoints, people, I believe in the power of coffee. Get coffee and get with somebody who disagrees with you and start having these discussions. Get them to your barbecue and tell them why you think they're wrong and don't hate them. That is my basic answer. And what that allows you to do is to de-re and cross-categorize people in a way that sees them not as an enemy, which is an ultimate kind of enemy. Berger in his book, J.M. Berger in his book, Extremism, talks about an extremist view is that it's an all or nothing, and I may need to resort to violence to get you to change your mind. And so many of the people I am interacting with, that is very close to where they are. Engagement in civic nationalism. Engagement in civic nationalism, not ethno-religious nationalism, but civic nationalism. There's a real difference here. And there's a fight in this country going over the definition of what it means to be a proper nationalist, an American who's proud to be an American. But I want to be committed to constitutional norms that we all signed up to. And that comes under civic nationalism. Yeah, coffee.
I have one more.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. We had another question from our colleague, Angie English. So it kind of takes us in a slightly different direction. She asks, what does Barbara Clark get wrong in her book, How Civil Wars Start? And, if you can give us some feedback on that, and what do you personally, David, think that the tipping point is for civil war here in the United States?
I think that she doesn't get much wrong. And I would love to say, yeah, but I don't think she gets much wrong. And she has worked for the agency on this for 20 years. And so she has looked at where countries have gone into this anocracy and then had these other elements there. Now, there are additional elements, but we're 3 times more likely to have a civil war if the 3 are there, the factions, the anocracy, and the existing militias. I don't think she gets that much wrong. I don't want to give up hope because I am surrounded by smart people that are committed to constitutional rights and that kind of nationalist perspective. I do think that she, in her book, she's an awfully smart lady. I do think that in her book, she doesn't deal with a way back from going to anocracy back to full democracy. So I would say that that's one place that I disagree with her. There's another book out there, and that's Steve Marsh's deal, The Next Civil War. I find Barbara Walter, and that's Walter, not Walters, different lady, but I find her more convincing and more grounded in research rather than journalism. And I love journalism, but I don't think it's a good basis for my own research. So that's why I go her direction. I'll tell you that I also have a lot of time for Dan Byman out of Georgetown. This guy is a wicked smart guy. I worked with him at Rand, and he has worked a lot on proto-insurgency and pre-insurgency and incipient insurgency and civil war. In fact, I did a deal with him 100 years ago and probably learned more working on that about insurgency than I have in anything recently.
I want to do a time check. We are coming to the top of the hour here. We have quite a few additional questions, though, so I'd kind of like to toss it out there to you. We could continue to kind of discuss this a little bit, or if you'd like, I could collect these questions and potentially we could, send out some additional information. What is your preference?
I'm happy for anything. Any way you want to do her is good to me.
All right. Well, I'll see if we can kind of tee up a few more of these. So we have another question from Rondelli. Dr. Brannan, should the state do better in preparing its citizens to participate in democracy in order to save democracy itself?
Yes.
And they go on to mention, the social trends do not indicate that people will throw away their TVs and pick up a book voluntarily.
I'm afraid you're right. Yes, I am afraid you're right. Yes, they need to do a better job. And I will tell you that there are countries out there doing a better job in a democratic setting. And I'm thinking of Estonia, which has done so much to try to inculcate and teach their population how to think critically. And obviously it's got to happen in the school. But it has to happen more than just in the school. It has to become a national priority. Has to be something that we apply money to, and applying money to people thinking critically about the biases that they want to enjoy on the facing book or the tweeter or whatever the heck it is not something that gets a lot of public support. We have to learn to think critically about the information that's coming in. And Estonia, is probably the example of one of the countries that's doing that very, very well. The short answer is just yes. And let it start with me. I mean, let it start with you. Start working with the ones that you love to teach them how to think carefully through. Going on Dr. Google is not research. Googling something allows them to curate a set of answers that they think you're willing to buy. Okay, that has nothing to do with research. And we need to help our loved ones and our friends get to the point where they recognize, well, I Googled it and you're wrong, is not a good answer.
Yeah. I'm going to throw up here these references that that you provided, just so that everybody has a moment to, kind of take a look at those, maybe jot down the names of some of those documents that you curated for us there, Dr. Brannan. I'm seeing another one that I want to share. I want to share this, but I'm just going to read it in the way that it was worded, and then we can kind of take a look at it. How do we have civil discourse in a modern world where media has 24/7 access to you? Social media is a strict echo chamber, and many in the higher ed area have socioeconomic agendas, and people have siloed themselves so that they only listen to those who agree with them and shout down the other side.
Yes. How do we do that? And I would argue that it's those 8-10 things that I brought up, and that somebody recognized is not likely to happen. That's probably not going to happen. But I'm about the most anti-regulation guy you ever met. But we regulate everything in this world, and social media is out of its mind in its ability to influence us. So whoever brought up this question identifies all of the key components to why we aren't doing it. My only answer to this is repeatedly to de-re and cross-categorize, and that it has to happen with smart people who are willing to think about it. I want to say it's very hard for me to look at Congress and see people screaming at each other across ideological gaps and have hope for people who are living their life in a siloed existence, just as the person that brought up this statement has suggested. If you watch other news, which I can't do, I don't have cable or any of that stuff, and I don't want it, frankly. The boss lady was a genius when she says we should get rid of it. But people, their head explodes if they're Fox people and they listen to MSNBC, or if they're Rachel Maddow people and they listen to Sean Hannity. Their heads explode because they're inculcated to a particular understanding of what is right or wrong. And we've done what Jonathan Haidt said, and we've made good people with a different religious or political perspective the enemy. We've got enemies, people. They don't need to be Americans. They really don't.
Yeah. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today. Do you have any additional thoughts that you'd like to leave us with or any advice for students or people who are still in that academic setting?
Yeah. Boy, when it comes to thinking about this most recent attack Saturday morning between Hamas and Israel, I urge you to get some foundation to understand the situation. Bruce Hoffman wrote a book years ago called Anonymous Soldiers, and it was a book he took a lot of hits for, being Jewish and having lived in Israel, from Israelis, because it was about Irgun, and it really lays out the history in a very accessible way, as far as I'm concerned. Get a foundation for what's going on there. Then get some frameworks for understanding. Understand that terrorism isn't just about the killing and the savagery, but these are rational actors that are trying to do something political. So understand rational actor theory and understand organizational approaches, and and understand the historic context, understand social identity theory. If you start to work within frameworks, you're going to get a lot further down the road in understanding. And I don't think there's that many people that really want to understand, but you're talking about academics, young and old. That's what we're supposed to be doing, is understanding so we can advise, not justify, but understanding the events so that we can make better policy going forward.
Right. Thank you. Well, I'd just like to say that on behalf of Idaho State University and the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Program, we want to thank you, and we want to thank our audience for taking the time to attend and participate in today's conversation. For more information about Idaho State University's program, our Homeland Security and Emergency Management degree programs, please visit our website at www.isu.edu/ESD for Emergency Services Department.
You know, Lori, no joke. I mean, you want to have these conversations on a regular basis, please come to the program and let's get involved in the discussion.
Excellent. And on that note,
folks.
thank you, everybody. Good night.
Be well.